Ladies, do you feel like you're all alone in your relationship? Like all the excitement and passion you had in the beginning are gone because your partner is busy working all the time and he's no longer wanting to have good sex with you or take you out on dates? And I totally think you have a right to feel that way because we cannot get lazy in our relationships. We cannot get lazy in our relationships. It's so important that I think when men start to put all their attention on their jobs and they no longer are attentive to their woman, I'll tell you what happened to me when my ex-husband became less and less attentive to me sexually and romantically. I started pulling away. I started sleeping with the kids. I started taking Vicodin. I started spending too much of his money, and I started becoming critical of him. And these were all, in my belief, I'm willing to be proven wrong. I believe that these were all reactions and responses to the way that he was treating me and he was neglecting me. Basically, sexually, he was using me as an ejaculation device with no interest in my pleasure at all. And he didn't want to go on trips with me at all. The kids always had to come along. But yet, outside the bedroom, he was this perfect husband and dad and provider. But in the bedroom is where he had a lot of emotional boundaries and intimacy issues. And these made me start to feel really resentful and repulsed, and I started pulling away. I I felt guilty for many years and still kind of do that. I spent too much of his money. But today, as I was driving to go to the train station to pick up a family member, I started realizing, you know what? He neglected me sexually and I neglected him financially. But I did those things only because he was so neglectful of me. It was 10 years into our marriage before I started doing all those things. But there are other women who might respond in a different way. Maybe they'll have an affair, they'll start drinking too much alcohol, they spend more time with their friends, maybe they spend more time with their family, they put themselves more into work or their children because we want to connect. And especially as women, for women especially, relationships are much more important. So I'm not saying a man has to spend a lot of time with us, but he must be attentive. He must be attentive sexually and romantically to some extent in order to keep the woman interested and to want to nurture him and to nurture the relationship. Otherwise, don't be just, ladies, if your guy's neglecting you, I'm not surprised that you start to resent him and not feel close to him and that you pull away and find your comfort elsewhere with your children, with something. We are not meant to be in relationships where we're ignored. We are not designed to be in relationships where we're neglected or ignored sexually or romantically. I would say that my ex-husband was like a really good man. That's why I stayed with him. This is the weirdest thing about it. He was always complimenting me and telling me I could do anything I wanted. He never once put me down. Maybe he called me a bitch once in a while and I would say fuck you and that was it. Like, we didn't argue. We would give each other the silent treatment for days at a time, just typical stuff, but there was no kind of abuse, but I would say there was neglect. And out of that neglect, I started pulling away. When I started not caring anymore because he was neglectful of me sexually. He used me as an ejaculation device in bed, but outside the bedroom, he was a good person. That's why I stayed with him, or I would have left, believe me. I write about this in my book, What I Did for Sex and What It Can Do for You, which you can get on Amazon. It's a pretty thick book. And I would have to say that because we had children together, I overlooked all those things. I would say that I was happy with our family life. I was very happy with our family life because growing up, I didn't have a family life. My dad was gone a lot. My parents divorced when I was in grade school. And I always just really wanted a family life. And I had my family life. But I also really wanted a good relationship with a man. And that's something that I wasn't able to have with him. When the kids got older and I came off the Vicodin, I started wanting that again, and I became really sweet. I was not a nagging wife. I would just say things like, hey, uh, why don't you want to kiss? Like, I would say it like that. I wouldn't say, why don't you want to kiss me, Um, because I had gone to the sex coach and he told me, you got to talk sweetly. And I was talking sweetly because I had was like really feeling in love with him for the first time in our marriage, really. And he started really falling in love with me. But still, sexually, there was this neglect. That's ultimately why I left him. I just couldn't deal with that anymore. I would say it's a form of abuse. Maybe I abused him financially by spending too much of his money. And, like I would buy things and bring them in the house when he wasn't home. He let me manage the money and I stopped being conservative with it, but I didn't give a shit anymore because he had neglected me. So I was definitely reacting in that way and not really aware that I was reacting in that way. But here's a quote from my book, because at the end of our relationship, the last 6 months, had an open relationship and we went to swinger events and he let me have sex with other women. And there was one woman I write about in this book that I really fell for, this lesbian woman. So here, let me read you this quote from the back. I lay next to my husband in bed night after night, longing to kiss. And since he didn't let me kiss him, and she did, I longed for her instead. So that's also an interesting thing about transferring attention and affection. I had transferred that wanting for connection and kissing from him to her, but on a deeper level, I think I transferred my need for maybe that I didn't get as a child from my parents for love and attention and connection onto him. So that's one thing to look at, that this kind of allowing him to mistreat me in this way and my longing for men who were unavailable came from that deeper wound of me not realizing, hey, I'm just like, that's my inner child longing for this childhood love and connection. And that would have made me not, if I would have known that back then, I would have just told him, you know what? We need to have a proper man-woman relationship for me to stay in this relationship with you. Is it something you're willing to work on? Because else I'm going to need to leave you. And it would have just been very clear and very simple with no negative energy or anger attached. And I would have just said, if you're just going to give me quickies, we're not going to have sex. We need to work on this. Let's deal with this. But I didn't know any of that back then, okay? And that's okay, because we're all growing and evolving. So it's really important, I think, that we remain attentive to our partners. And if I no longer want to be attentive to my partner, it's better to just say goodbye and own it, or just come up and say, hey, you know what? I don't like how these things are going. I'd like to work on this. How about you? But for sure, I'm going to own that I was too critical of him. I was spent too much of his money. After the first 10 years, I was good. But starting in year 10, I'd had enough of being told no to everything sexual or romantic, and I wasn't asking for a lot. I wasn't even asking him to help me with the housework, because that was my domain because he was working. All I wanted was a date once a week, sex that wasn't just 2 minutes long, that using me as a way to get off, and some interest in exploring sexuality and relationships, like going something deeper, like occasionally. So when I didn't get any of that, and all of his attention went into his job, his household chores, the kids, his exercise, and there wasn't any personal interest in me. I started withdrawing, and I became too critical, spent too much of his money, started taking the Vicodin, and didn't want to fuck him anymore. So I'm going to own that. I really think that it started with him neglecting me. And that's one thing I think that my sons have learned. They're very attentive to their women, but not in a beta type of way, in a very alpha way, because a man cannot be like a puppy dog. That is not hot. That's not what I mean with being attentive to your woman. Men definitely have to be on their purpose and on their mission. And I'm not a feminist. I do not think that men should be little servants vacuuming the house. You can pay someone to do it, or you can do it yourself, because I do not think women should be working full time. I think that a woman's place is halfway in the home. There has to be someone to nourish the home and raise the children. And to nurture the feminine energy, we have to nurture it by having space and having beauty and doing things like knitting and baking and being out in the sunshine. The feminine energy doesn't thrive in the workplace. The masculine energy is very focused and very directed, and they thrive by competition and working and all of that. But the feminine energy is not nurtured by working full-time and competing in the workplace. It's not. And so I'm not a feminist in that way. So I really am a big believer in women being able to support themselves. And ideally, a woman has a part-time job. And that way, a woman can have some interest outside the home. She can earn her own money. And if she ever needs to support herself, she absolutely can, because she is still plugged into the workforce. And one thing that was very apparent to me, I write about this, sequencing, and that is one of the chapters in my book. So I was a quality assurance manager for a software company when my daughter was born, and I went back part-time with my big breast pump in tow. And then I was laid off when the company downsized, and I started looking for another professional job that was part-time, I would say 20 hours a week, and there were none. I had a friend who went back part-time. She was an engineer, but she, like me, had negotiated that because she had already worked there and they wanted to keep her like they wanted to keep me when I went back part-time. And I had a nanny at home to take care of my daughter. But all the professional jobs I saw were full-time. And I thought, all these moms I knew that stopped working to stay home with our kids, that wanted to work part-time and couldn't find a part-time job, I thought these companies are fucking missing out by not creating this opportunity for women who want to contribute really badly and could do a great job, and you don't have to pay them benefits, because we have benefits from our husbands. And it fucking surprises me, it's 2020, that this is still like a big fucking void in our economy. So what happens? These jobs are all full-time. So now women are competing with men for the same jobs, keeping everyone's wages super low. If they would just unplug some of that and create like this whole pool of part-time jobs for women to work, then the men could earn more money and they could be the providers again, and we would have a little bit more of a balance. Women are feeling stressed out because they're working all day, they're coming home, and then they're in charge of the children, or if the children are grown, the housework, and it's not nourishing to our feminine energy to be running around all day. It lowers our sex drive. Okay, men can have sex when they're stressed. Women cannot. I am very against this whole women competing in the workplace thing. Yeah, there are women who want to work full time. Hey, if you want to do it, you can. Good for you. But I do not think it's feminine. It's not nurturing to the heart, and it's not really, I think, what a lot of women really want if you ask them. I also think that a lot of women have turned off their femininity because they think that it's weak, and they think that they have to work to be valued or whatever, but it's depleting and stressful to women. Now, I didn't have to work. I was home with the kids, and being home with the kids all day is like, oh my God. it's very depleting, it's very stressful, and I don't think we're made for that either, because in olden days when we lived in tribes, the whole tribe helped with the children. You have children, you have people helping, they have other children playing with each other. The whole nuclear family thing is just very stressful for everyone. So that's why I think working part-time is ideal in a nuclear family society. Um, but nonetheless, I had that kind of life where I wasn't stressed. Once my youngest turned 2, I wasn't stressed anymore. And I wanted that interaction with my husband, and I wanted to have sex with him. But because the sex I was having was just so fucking horrible. And that's what I want to say to all those guys who are upset that their woman cheated on them. Like this guy that I follow, I'm not going to say his name on the YouTube channel, that coaches the men, and his wife cheated on him and his ex-girlfriend cheated on him. Like, why'd she cheat on you? Did you neglect her because you were out building your career? You cannot neglect your woman. You cannot neglect your woman, okay? She's going to neglect you. That's all I want to say. You neglect your woman, she's going to start neglecting you. And I'm not saying that a woman is some needy thing, but she needs attention like a garden. Okay, I have some plants, okay? I have some plants. I have to go out there like at least every other day and see, put the moisture meter in, see if they need water. And I'm not going to overwater them because they're not needy, but they need water. I can't just ignore my plants and expect them to bloom. They don't bloom. They start to wilt. Just start noticing, ladies, if you start to wilt, just start to notice, like, are you really needy, or is like your partner ignoring you? If your partner's ignoring you, I really suggest just having a heart-to-heart conversation to open up some dialogue and say, hey, you know, I just remember how great it was at the beginning when we met and we had such good times together, and I want to have some connection with you. I really want to be closer with you. I want to have a little more intimacy with you. You know, how can I be a better wife? What would, you know, how do you feel about improving our relationship? And see what he says, and then you have a decision to make. Do you want to stay in this relationship with someone who doesn't give a shit? Do you want to leave? Do you want to just learn to nurture yourself so that you, because you want to stay with the kids? You know, at least you can be conscious about the choices that you're making, instead of looking back years later like me and being like, you know, I feel like I'm treated really badly. I'm like some victim here. And I felt like a victim for a really long freaking time. You know, I felt like a victim. And sometimes I still do. Like, he treated me so badly, but you know, I allowed it. I stayed and I allowed it. And I think that we maybe took advantage of each other. I used him as a provider so I could stay home with the kids. I didn't want to work even though he wanted me to. And he used me as the mom to take care of the kids. He used me as an ejaculation device. And we were both complicit in the arrangement. And I think we were both unhappy with the arrangement because we weren't really conscious of what was happening, and we didn't talk about what was happening. You know, there were always these things that were never to be discussed, things that we wouldn't discuss. And when I wanted to go to counseling, he would only go if it was like super, super desperate, urgent. He wouldn't go. You know, when I felt unhappy and dissatisfied, when I came to him and said, I really want to go to counseling, or I really want to do this thing, if he didn't want to do it, he would just tell me no. Now, that's really good to say no when you don't want to do something. But on the other hand, you know, if your woman's heart is being injured by your lack of attention to her needs, I don't think that's so good for the relationship. You know, I just don't think that's so good for the relationship. I think that men have to keep being attentive to our reasonable needs, okay? And I consider myself a reasonable person. I think that my needs were reasonable. Now, I'm more invested in learning and growing than in being right. So if anyone were to come up to me and say, you know, you weren't needy enough, you were too needy, you were the one that caused all this, I want to know, because I still feel like I'm a little bit stuck there in this area of my life, and I would love to have like a breakthrough, a breakthrough in this area, because I still feel like there's still something off with this thing about men in my life. And now I just feel like men have disappointed me. You know, my whole life, my ex-husband disappointed me. I think my dad disappointed me. Like, I don't have this big thing like men disappointed me. But it's to the point I don't even look for a relationship anymore. That's what I want to say. I kind of gave up because I'm like, they're just disappointing. Men are either too boring, too unattractive, not good enough in bed. Like, what do they have to offer me? So I'm at the point now, I'm just going to be honest, where I feel like, what can a man really offer me besides sex or money? That's really all I want from them at this point, sex or money. And when they're with me sexually, they're super sweet, and that's enough. I don't really think that a man can give me anything emotionally that I can't give myself. Right now, I'm more interested in, you know, I'm almost 60. My mom always said that after the kids are grown, life is for going into the spiritual. It's the spiritual part of life. I think it's really good for me to focus on that right now and really develop that part of myself. And then if the time is right, a man will come along. But I'm no longer looking for that as some way to complete me. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I'm no longer looking for a man to complete me in some way. I don't think that a man can complete me in some way. I don't think that there's this perfect guy who's going to be like super good looking. Like yesterday I spent several hours with my friend Viola Day. She's another escort, and we had such a lovely tea and walk together. And I just was just in awe just looking at her the whole time. No, we were not romantically involved or anything, but she's so beautiful. And that's the same way I feel when I'm looking at a guy who's attractive. Like, I can't take my eyes off of him. And I don't really often see men who look like that. And that's something I would want. Like, oh my God, I just love looking at you. So maybe that'll come along for me at some point. If it does, it'll be there, but I'm no longer seeking for it. Anyway, if you want to get my book, What I Did for Sex, please do. Today's Christmas Eve. I have things to do. I am with people today, and so I do need to go. It's 9 in the morning. I do need to go, but I just really want to make this video where I had this insight of, you know, I'm not going to feel guilty anymore for spending too much of his money, because I used him. I wasn't a good fiduciary of our money anymore at the end. But that was, I'm going to say, a reaction to him totally neglecting me romantically and sexually. So I think that we're square on that. I don't feel like I owe him anymore, because I kept thinking, oh, if I make a bunch of money off my book or something, I'll give him back all this money he spent on me. But I think that we're even. I think he and I are even on that. Totally even. So no more guilt. And I just also wanted to say to ladies, if you feel sexually or romantically neglected, hey, you know, you're not the only one. Read my book and see what it was like for me. And support my book in that way. I would love it if you would leave me a review on Amazon. And if you like my videos, subscribe to my channel so that you can catch all the videos that I make. And thank you for watching.